Hi, I'm David. Welcome to A Tale. Once a week on this channel, we tell a true story from history, the kind I stay up too late reading about, told slow enough to fall asleep to. Tonight, it is the story of Bessie Coleman, who picked cotton in Texas, washed other people's laundry for years, and became the first black woman in the world to earn a pilot's license, after every flight school in America told her no. I will be honest with you right at the start, because that is how we do things here. Her life was short, and this story will say so, briefly and gently, near the end, and never as a scene. But nothing she built was ever lost, and the story ends where she would want it to end, in a sky full of the people who followed her through the door she opened. Everything you will hear is drawn from the records and the historians, and the sources are listed below. There are no ads waiting to wake you. Before we begin, one quiet word. If these nights help you sleep, subscribe now while your eyes are still open, and tomorrow night will be waiting for you when you need it. A like helps other tired travelers find this fire. That is the whole ask. So settle in, get warm, and let an old story keep you company. Good night. Close your eyes now, if you like. This is a story, and it is true, and it asks nothing of you except that you lie still and let it happen. And before we begin it, let me give you the ending, the way we always do, so that you can hold it the whole way through, the way you hold a rail on a dark stair. There was once a woman, born in a sharecropper's house in the pine country of East Texas in 1892, who picked cotton as a girl, walked 4 miles to a one-room school, and washed other people's laundry for years of her life. And somewhere in those years, she decided, calmly and completely, that she was going to fly airplanes. Every flight school in the United States refused to teach her because she was black, and refused again because she was a woman. So she learned French at night, after work, out of books and a classroom in downtown Chicago, and sailed across the ocean, and in a wooden hangar on the windy coast of France, she learned to fly. And on the 15th of June, 1921, the great International Aviation Authority of the age handed her its license, and she became the first black woman on this earth certified to fly an airplane. She came home, and the crowds called her Queen Bess. She flew loops and figure eights over New York and Chicago and Texas, and she made rules for herself that nobody dared make in that age, and kept every one of them, and tens of thousands of people who had been told the age of flight was not for them, stood in open fields and watched her write the plain answer across the sky. And now the honest part, spoken plainly here at the start, so that nothing in this story can ever ambush you. Her life was short. In the spring of 1926, when she was 34, the work she loved took her, in an accident far from home. When we come to that moment, near the end of tonight, we will pass it the way her friends would have wished, briefly, truthfully, gently, and with honor, and we will not watch it happen. You know it now, and so it can never surprise you. And you know something else too, which is that it is not where this story ends, because this story does not end in a fall. It ends in a sky, slowly filling up with people. It ends with flying clubs, named for her in the year 1929, and the first all-black air show in America in 1931, and pilots dropping flowers from their planes onto her grave every spring for decades. And if you want one picture to hold all night, hold this one. 66 years after her death, in 1992, a physician and astronaut named Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space, rode the shuttle Endeavour around the whole turning Earth, and among the few small personal things an astronaut is allowed to carry, she carried a photograph of Bessie Coleman. The girl from the cotton rows made it to orbit. It just took 2 lifetimes, and it was always going to happen because of her. And one thing more, because it is the reason this story, of all stories, belongs to bedtime. Bessie Coleman was born into a country of fences, property lines she worked inside and would never own, cotton rows measured to the inch, doors she could not enter, cars she had to ride at the back of, schools with one room for children like her, gates at every fairground with 2 entrances and a sign. Every kingdom anyone ever offered her had a fence running through the middle of it. And then she looked up. The sky at dusk was the one kingdom she could see that had no fences in it anywhere. No lines, no signs, no gates, no back rows. Nobody had ever managed to divide it, and nobody ever will. She looked at the one unfenced country there is, and she decided it would be hers, and she was right. That same country is above your roof at this moment, going quietly dark, wide open, from horizon to horizon. As you drift tonight, remember that you are lying beneath the only kingdom that has never turned anyone away. She claimed it for everyone. That includes you. Let the story take its time now. It has a whole sky to cross, and it is in no hurry, and neither are you. She was born on the 26th of January, 1892, in Atlanta, Texas, which is not the famous Atlanta, but a small cotton and timber town tucked into the far northeast corner of Texas, where the pine woods come down almost to the dooryards. Her parents, Susan and George Coleman, were sharecroppers, farming land that belonged to somebody else for a share of the crop that was never quite enough. They had been born into the world slavery made in its last years or its first ruins, and the records of their beginnings are thin, the way the records of the poor always are. George Coleman carried Native American blood as well as African, Choctaw, or Cherokee, as the family told it. And that detail matters to the story, because when his daughter earned her license, it made her not only the first black woman in the world to hold one, but the first woman of Native American descent as well. 2 firsts, carried up in one small person. Bessie came in the middle of a crowd. There were 13 children all told, and she was the 10th as the family counted them, though in that time and place, with births at home and paper scarce, even a family's own count could wobble by one. When she was about 2 years old, the Colemans moved south to Waxahachie, a cotton town below Dallas that called itself the Crossroads of Texas, and there her father did a thing that was rare and hard for a black man in that country. He bought a 1/4 acre of land outright on the African American side of town and built a small frame house on it with his own hands. Whatever else the world withheld, the Colemans slept under their own roof. The world of her childhood was cotton. In the fall, when the bolls broke open white across the flat black land, everything else stopped, school included, and whole families went down the rows together, dragging long sacks that began the day empty and ended it heavier than a child. Bessie hated it, and said so all her life, and did it anyway, year after year, because the family ate by it. But here's the first thing to know about her, the first glint of the person she was going to be. At the end of the row stood the scale, where the day's picking was weighed and credited, and it was no secret in that time that a foreman's pencil could lean against a sharecropping family, and the family could do nothing about it. Bessie was quick at figures, the quickest in the household, and so it became her job, still a girl in a cotton sack line, to watch the weighing and keep the family's own count. The foreman wrote his number. The child in the third row back had already worked it out to the pound, and the family was not cheated, or at least not easily, and everyone on both sides of the scale knew why. Remember her there, small and dusty and absolutely unmovable, doing arithmetic against the world. She will stand in exactly that posture in front of much bigger scales later, and the arithmetic will keep coming out hers. School, when the cotton allowed it, was a one-room wooden schoolhouse 4 miles away, one teacher for every child of every age, and Bessie walked those 4 miles there and 4 miles home, and loved it, which is its own kind of courage. She was the star of the arithmetic lessons, and she finished every grade that little school had to offer, all 8 of them, which was every inch of education Waxahachie was prepared to give a black child, and more than most children of the cotton rows ever got. And into that small, hungry world, 2 or 3 times a year, came a wagon, a library wagon, rolling through the black side of town with books to lend, and in the Coleman house, those books were gold. Her mother Susan could not read. Her daughter read to her, and to all of them, aloud by the oil lamp in the evenings, the Bible on Sundays, and the wagon's books the rest of the week. And among those books, the family remembered long afterward, were the lives of people who had refused the world as they found it. Booker T. Washington, and a woman called Harriet Tubman, whose story this fireside has told before, on another night, and if you heard that night, you may smile here. Because somewhere in the 1890s, in a lamp-lit sharecropper's house in Texas, a girl was reading about the woman who walked out of slavery and kept going back, and something in the girl was quietly taking notes. When she closed the book, the family said she told her mother that she intended to amount to something. Nobody in the room laughed. That is worth noticing too. One more hard thing belongs to this chapter, and we will set it down honestly and gently and move on. When Bessie was about 9, her father left. George Coleman was a man of 2 bloods, an estate that had a fence for each of them, and he wore out. He moved north to the Indian Territory, the land that was about to become Oklahoma, where his native ancestry gave him standing that Texas would never give him, and he asked his family to come. Susan said no. Her work, her church, her house, her children's schooling, such as they were in Waxahachie, and she would not gamble them. So he went, and she stayed, and the marriage ended across that distance. We will not judge either of them tonight. The country handed them a choice with no good answer inside it. What the record shows is this: Susan Coleman, who could not read, raised the younger children alone on a cook's wages and the cotton rows, kept every one of them fed, and kept the reader in the family reading. When her famous daughter stood before crowds years later, she named her mother as the beginning of it all. The girl who kept account grew into a young woman with one fixed idea: more school. There was no high school for her in Waxahachie. If she wanted learning past the 8th grade, she would have to buy it, mile by mile, dollar by dollar. So she went to work in the one trade always open to a black woman in a Texas town, which was other people's laundry: washing, boiling, wringing, starching, ironing, delivering, for pennies a bundle, season after season, and setting aside what could be set aside, which was never much, into a fund with a door at the end of it. The door was called Langston. In 1910, when she was about 18, Bessie Coleman took her laundry savings and enrolled at the Colored Agricultural and Normal University at Langston, Oklahoma, the school her father's new state kept for black students. And for one term, She had the life she had read about in the wagon books, classrooms, a library that came to more than a shelf, young people from 6 states who all intended to amount to something. It is a small detail, but a telling one, that she signed up with an eye already on the sciences. The count keeper wanted the numbers behind the world. The money lasted 1 term. That is not a long time, and it was every cent of years of wash tubs, and when it was gone, she packed her trunk and went home. And here, the story hands us one of those details that sounds invented and is simply Bessie. When word reached her that her church back home was planning a welcome party for her return, she did not slink home from her unfinished degree. The story goes that she stepped off the train with the Langston School Band in tow, brought along to play at her own party. 1 term was not failure in that community. 1 term of college was a family's flag planted on a hill, and she arrived home with the music to prove it. And then, because there was nothing else to do, she went back to the laundry. She was 5 more years at the wash tubs. Let that sentence sit a moment, because the legend always skips it. 5 more years of other people's collars and sheets. 18 to 23, the years when a life is supposed to open, in a town that had already shown her its entire offer. What saves this chapter from sadness is what she did with the inside of it. Her older brothers had gone north, to Chicago, in the first ripples of the great movement of black families out of the South that history now calls the Great Migration, and their letters came back down the line like reports from another planet. Wages, lights, streets, where a black man walked fast and looked straight ahead. She read those letters aloud too. And in 1915, 23 years old, she closed the last wash tub, took the train north through night country, and joined them. Chicago. Say the word the way it sounded in a Texas cotton town in 1915, like a door swinging open somewhere far to the north. She came up the line to the south side, where her brothers Walter and John had rooms. Walter steady and settled, a Pullman porter on the great trains, John charming and restless and good company. And she stepped out into the one place in America built to astonish her. They called the heart of it the Stroll. State Street on the south side, in the few packed blocks where black Chicago did its business and wore its best. And in those years, it may have been the brightest street black America had. Theaters, banks, cafes, newspapers, music coming out of doorways at night. The new music, the one the whole century was about to catch. Tailored men and hatted women promenading of an evening just to see and be seen. A woman who had spent her 20s bent over wash tubs, walked into all of that lit noise, and made a decision worthy of her. She was not going to scrub anything in this city. She enrolled in beauty school, learned manicuring, and took a chair at the White Sox barber shop on the Stroll, one of the busiest shops on the street, and set out to be the best at it. And people who were there said she was quick, exact, immaculate. The same hands that had done arithmetic on cotton scales, now doing precise small work all day while the whole city talked around her. And understand what a barber shop was on that street. It was the parliament of the neighborhood. Ball players came through, and businessmen, and railroad men, and gamblers, and preachers, and every story in black Chicago got told in those chairs eventually. The girl who had read every book in the wagon now sat at the middle of the greatest talking room in the city, listening, as she had always listened, and filing, as she had always filed. She spent about 5 years there, respectable, well paid by her old standards, going nowhere in particular. Then the war came home from France, and it brought her life's idea with it. Her brothers had gone to the war. They came back whole, thank goodness, and they came back full of France, the way the black soldiers of that war came back full of it, a country where a black American walked through the front door of a cafe and nobody looked up. And John, the charming one, liked to hold court in the barber shop about it. One afternoon, as the family told it ever after, laughing, John was teasing his little sister at her manicure table, and he reached for the thing that would sting best and said that French women were something American women would never be. French women, he said, could even fly airplanes. Black women here, he said, would never do that. The shop laughed. Bessie, the family said, laughed too, and then stopped laughing and said quietly, something to the effect of, "That is it. You just called it for me." The family polished that scene for 50 years, so we hold the exact words loosely. Brothers and sisters tease, and legends grow in barber shops better than anywhere on earth. But the timing is real and documented. It was in those months, with the war just over, and the air age roaring open above the whole world, that Bessie Coleman, manicurist, about 27 years old, began telling people she was going to be a flyer. Airplanes were 7 years younger than she was. The whole sky was brand new. Somewhere between a brother's joke and a decision already years old in her, the count keeper looked up from the table and picked the one kingdom with no fences in it. She did it the way she did everything, in order, starting with the obvious. She applied to flight schools. There were schools by then, in and around Chicago and beyond, teaching returned airmen and adventurous young sportsmen, and even, here and there, a white woman or two. She applied and was refused, and applied and was refused. The refusals came in 2 layers, and she named them plainly for the rest of her life. The schools would not take her because she was black, and would not take her because she was a woman, and no argument, no cash in hand, no evident brilliance moved any of them an inch. There was no black flying school in America, because there were as yet almost no black flyers in America to found one. Every single door, from one coast to the other, was the same door, and it was shut. Now, a lesser story would stall here, but this one turns instead on 2 facts she had in her pocket. The first was a name every reader of the black press knew. Eugene Bullard, a black man from Georgia who had gone to France before America even entered the war, and had flown fighter planes for the French themselves. Let us pause and be exact, because being exact is the whole promise of this fireside. Bessie Coleman was not the first black American in the air, and this story will not pretend she was. Bullard was there first, in another country's uniform, and honor to him. What his story proved, to a manicurist reading in a barber shop in Chicago, was a piece of arithmetic she could check like a cotton scale. America says no. France says yes. France exists. The fence, in other words, had an end, and the end of it was an ocean away, and oceans can be crossed. The second fact she had was an ally, and he was one of the most formidable allies on the continent. Robert S. Abbott was the founder and publisher of the Chicago Defender, the mightiest black newspaper in America, a paper so feared in the South that it moved along the rails in the luggage of Pullman porters, Walter's Brotherhood, handed off quietly like contraband hope. Abbott had built all that from nearly nothing, and he had a showman's eye and a missionary's temper, and when the determined manicurist reached him with her blocked ambition, he saw what she saw, and further, a black woman with a pilot's license would not just be a flyer, she would be a headline that flew, proof in the sky over every city she visited. Go to France, he told her, in substance. Stop knocking on doors that will never open, and go where the air is honest. And first, learn French. So the manicurist added a night school to her days. Through 1920, she studied French in the evenings, at a Berlitz classroom in the Chicago Loop. Verbs after a full day of hands and scissors. A woman nearing 30, conjugating her way toward the sky. She left the manicure chair for better wages, running a chili parlor, because the fund needed feeding, and she fed it the way she'd fed the Langston Fund, steadily, with everything spare. Abbott's paper got behind her, and some money came with the backing, from Abbott himself and, it is said, from the banker Jesse Binga, another of Black Chicago's self-made men. The record of exactly who paid what has softened with time. So we say what is certain. Her own savings led, and powerful men followed, which is the right order, and was rare enough in any age. In November of 1920, she stood on a pier in New York with a passport, a steamer ticket, night school French, and the entire settled intention of her life, and sailed east across the winter Atlantic. Picture her at the rail in the dark, if you like, somewhere in the middle of that crossing. A woman from Waxahachie, Texas, 28 years old, standing very still between two continents, with the whole fenced country of her childhood sinking behind her, and the unfenced one waiting up ahead. Nobody on that ship knew who she was. Everybody in this story is about to find out. The place where Bessie Coleman learned to fly is worth seeing slowly, because it is beautiful, and because she earned every blade of its grass. Le Crotoy is a small fishing town on the north coast of France, where the river Somme opens into the sea through miles of salt marsh and tidal sand, flat as Texas, loud with seabirds, swept all year by an Atlantic wind. On that coast, the Caudron brothers, pioneers of French aviation, kept a flying school, and it was there, in the last days of 1920, that the manicurist from the stroll presented herself, enrolled, and put on flying clothes. The country around her was quiet, in a way she may only slowly have understood, the Somme. 2 years before, that name had meant the worst the world had yet done to itself. The fields inland were still healing, and so were the young men of France. Into that hushed, mending countryside came a black woman from Texas, asking to be taught the newest thing on earth, and the French, to their lasting credit, taught her at the same field, in the same machines, to the same standard as everyone else. She said afterward that she walked 9 miles each day to the field and 9 miles back, having no money to spare for anything better. And if the figure has the round shine of a story told many times, the poverty and the walking were real. She was living on savings, measured in wash tubs and manicures, in the cheapest lodgings the town had, in a language she had learned at night. The machine they taught her in was a Newport, a French biplane of wood and linen and wire, with 2 open cockpits and a rotary engine. The same family of machine France's aces had flown in the war. Flight training then was nothing like a classroom. You learned with your body how to taxi the skittish thing across the grass, how to lift it off and set it down, over and over, the hardest skill in aviation, how to bank and hold a turn with the horizon tilted past your shoulder. Figure eights, the examiner's favorite pattern, how to climb and stall, And most important of all, what to do when the engine stopped, which engines then did often and without appointment. She learned to cut her power and glide, to pick her field, to land dead stick and walk away. Every lesson was in French. Every takeoff was over ground. Her country's law said she should never have stood on as anything but a servant. She was, by every account that survives, a calm, exact, utterly determined student. One day during her training, a fellow student was killed in a crash on the field. That is the whole of what we will say of it, except for what she said, which was that it was a terrible shock to her nerves, and for what she did, which was to keep walking to the field every morning afterward. She had known the price of the sky before she ever sailed. Now she had seen it, and she stayed. Hold that quietly for a moment, and then let it go, the way she had to. The course at Le Crotoy ordinarily took the better part of a year. She finished in about 7 months, and on the 15th of June, 1921, having flown her figures and satisfied her examiners, Bessie Coleman was granted a pilot's license by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the great international authority of the air age, the same body that certified the pioneers and the aces. It was a small card with a photograph and a few lines of French. It weighed nothing. It outweighed every fence in Texas. She was 29 years old, and she was, on that day, the first black woman in the world to hold a pilot's license, and, through her father, the first woman of Native American descent as well. And no flight school in America had contributed one single hour to it. You will sometimes hear larger claims made for that day, and this fireside tells the documented truth, because the documented truth needs no polish. Not the first black American aloft, for Bullard had flown in war before her. Not the first American woman licensed, for a handful of white women had managed it in the years before. What she was, no one else on earth was. First black woman, first of her father's people's daughters. And more than either title, she was the proof, card in hand, that the door had never been locked from the inside. She spent the months after her license in further training near Paris, polishing what the school had begun, taking lessons, the story goes, from a French veteran of the war. And in September of 1921, she sailed for New York. The black press met her at the pier. The white press, with a few exceptions, looked away and kept looking away for most of her life, which tells you nothing about her and everything about them. The Defender trumpeted her home. In New York, the story goes, the cast of Shuffle Along, the great black musical then conquering Broadway, honored her from the stage with a silver cup. She was famous now, in the country within the country, the nation of the Defender's readers, and she understood immediately, with Abbott, what the fame was for. It was a lever, and she knew exactly what she intended to lift with it. Here's the problem she came home to, and she solved it the way she solved everything, with arithmetic. A license lets you fly. It does not pay you to fly. There were no airlines to hire anyone, hardly, and none that would hire her. No airmail routes for a black woman, no military commissions. The only living the sky offered in 1921 was the air show. Barnstorming, exhibition flying, loops and rolls and figure eights over fairgrounds, while a crowd paid at the gate. And exhibition flying was a further education all its own, beyond anything a license required. So she counted her money and did the sum, and in February of 1922, she sailed back to Europe to finish becoming unanswerable. That second European season is a tour worth smiling through. In France, she trained further and studied the acrobatic trade. In the Netherlands, she visited Anthony Fokker, the most famous airplane builder alive, whose machines had ruled the war skies, and was received with honor. And in Germany, where the Fokker works then stood, she took further instruction, the accounts say, from one of the company's own chief pilots, and flew bigger machines than any she had touched, and was filmed flying them. Newsreel footage she shrewdly kept, because film of a black woman handling a great aircraft over Europe was worth more than gold to the lever she was building. Consider, for one soft moment, the itinerary in itself. A woman whose mother could not read, whose savings had once been counted in laundry bundles, moving through the flying capitals of Europe as a professional among professionals, welcomed in shops and airfields. Her own country would not let her sweep. Then she came home in the late summer of 1922 and went to work. On the 3rd of September, 1922, at Curtis Field on Long Island, just outside New York City, Bessie Coleman made her American debut. The show was staged with the Defenders backing and dedicated to the veterans of the 369th Infantry, the celebrated Black Regiment of the War, the men New York called the Harlem Hellfighters, and the billing, which for once was simple truth, announced the first public flight of a black woman in America. She went up in the afternoon, before thousands, flew her figures, and brought the machine down sweet. And men who had been sent to France to fight for a country that then sent them home to the back of the line stood on an American field and watched a black woman own the air above it. 6 weeks later, on the 15th of October, she did it again at the Checkerboard Airdrome outside Chicago, home ground. The stroll emptied out to see her, her own family looking up, her mother Susan among the crowd, watching her daughter turn figure eights against the prairie sky. The girl who read by the oil lamp had become the lamp, and so began the flying life, and for a while it was glorious. The black press crowned her Queen Bess, and the name stuck because it fit. She had a queen's carriage and a queen's temper for the work. She barnstormed wherever the gates would have her, riding the trains between engagements like a one-woman circus. The leather coat, the tailored uniform she'd made because appearances were ammunition, the film reels, the lecture notes. She flew borrowed and rented machines, mostly the war surplus training biplanes everybody called Jennies, cheap, slow, honest old crates that a good pilot could make dance. Between shows, she filled theaters and churches and school halls, showing her films, telling the story, always the same message under the showmanship, delivered to every black audience in every town. The air is new, the air is honest, the air has room for you. There were not yet a dozen people on earth who could stand on a stage and say that message with a license in their pocket to prove it, and exactly one of them was a woman, and she was standing in front of them. She sold rides too, $5 a seat, up and around and down, and think what those $5 rides were. For hundreds of people, sharecroppers' children and laundry women, and porters and teachers, their first time ever off the face of the earth, and they went up with her. Grandmothers went up, preachers went up, whole towns worth of nerve went up, one passenger at a time, and came down changed. It is one thing to be told, the fences end at the treetops. It is another thing to be taken above them and shown, and every one of those $5 sermons was flown by a woman the flight schools of America had turned away at the door. Now this story has some weather in it. and we will fly through it honestly, because she did, and you already know every landing in this tale, but one is safe, and you already know about that one, and it is not this one. The first squall was about dignity, and she flew straight into it on purpose. In the winter after her American debut, a film company came courting, a motion picture about her life, with Queen Bess playing herself. It was a perfect brick for the school fund, and she said yes, and traveled to New York for it, until she read what the first scene required. They wanted her to appear as she had never been, in rags, with a walking stick and a pack, a shuffling country caricature stumbling into the great city. The stock figure white America preferred its black stories to begin with. She quit on the spot. She walked off the set, and the door of that money slammed behind her, and a showman who knew her reported her exit line, which we pass along in his memory of it. No Uncle Tom stuff for me. The people financing her career were furious. Managers cooled. Backers drifted. The easy path forward got hard. She never expressed one syllable of regret about it, then or ever. Hold this scene next to the child at the cotton scale, because it is the same scene. A Coleman standing in front of a number somebody else wrote, saying no, that is not the true count. The second squall was the trade itself, collecting its toll. In early February of 1923, in California, flying to her first West Coast engagement in a Jenny she had just bought with her own money, her first own airplane, the engine failed on her shortly after takeoff near Santa Monica, too low to glide clear, and the machine went down. She lived, or there would be no chapters left in this tale, but she was badly hurt. A broken leg, broken ribs, cuts and shock, and the recovery cost her months in bed just when momentum mattered most. What could not walk, though, could still dictate, and from that hospital bed, she sent out through the press the sentence that became her flag, and it is one of the few sentences of hers we have exactly as she released it. So enjoy it at full strength. Tell them all, she wired, that as soon as I can walk, I am going to fly. And the joke of the ages is on everyone who doubted her, because that is simply, literally, what happened. The 2 lean years that followed were the laundry years wearing a different apron, and she worked them the same way. Engagements were thinner. Money was thin. The film reels and the lecture circuit carried her through the black churches and theaters and schoolhouses of Chicago and beyond, while the leg mended and the fund crept upward. What never wavered, not once in any account from those years, was the aim. Everything. The shows, the lectures, the $5 rides, the beauty work she would later take up again, all of it poured toward one fixed star she talked about to anyone who would listen: a flight school, an American flight school for black students, so that the next Bessie Coleman, whoever and wherever she was, would not need an ocean, a second language, and a miracle just to be taught what the air already offered everyone. She had walked through the locked door. The whole rest of her life was an attempt to take the door off its hinges. In the spring of 1925, she took the mended leg and the whole show south to Texas, home ground, hardest ground, and gave the last full flying season of her life, and the best of it. She set up in Houston, and for her return to the sky over her own state, she chose, with a showman's genius and a count-keeper's sense of justice, the 19th of June. Juneteenth, the day black Texas keeps as its own. The anniversary of the day in 1865, when freedom was finally read aloud in Galveston, 2 whole years late. And on Juneteenth, 1925, 60 years almost to the day after that reading, Bessie Coleman went up over Houston in front of a great black crowd come out in their holiday best, and flew loops and figures and dives, and landed to a roar, and then spent the rest of the day taking passengers aloft, elders and church women and children, many of them the first people in their families ever to leave the ground. The Defender and the local paper sang it. Queen Bess was back, on the one day of the calendar that meant exactly what she meant. All that summer she toured Texas, and the shows drew both races, in an age when almost nothing did. White Texans and black Texans stood in the same fields and watched the same small woman own the same sky and paid the same money at the gate. And the gate is the thing. The gate is where this chapter earns its name. And if this tale had to keep only one scene of her on the ground, it would keep this one. The tour came, at last, to Waxahachie, home. The town of the quarter acre, and the 4-mile walks and the wash tubs, and she was to fly over it as the most famous black woman in America, and the organizers laid out the grounds in the manner of the time and place. 2 gates, 2 ticket lines, white spectators through one entrance, black spectators through the other, before the crowd settled into its divided sections. And Bessie Coleman, who needed this engagement and its money for the school fund, who was one signature away from flying in triumph over her own childhood, looked at the plan and said no. 1 gate or no show. Everyone walks onto these grounds through the same entrance, she told them in substance, where the sky over Waxahachie stays empty today. The organizers argued. She did not move. You knew from the cotton scale chapter that she would not move, and now they learned it too. And they yielded. 1 gate. On the day of the show, every spectator of every color came through the same entrance together in a Texas cotton town in 1925. Once inside, we will tell the truth because we always tell the truth. The crowd was still seated in the old divided way. The fence had been moved, not torn out. She took the victory that could be taken, banked it, and flew. And it became her standing rule, stated plainly for the rest of her career, that Queen Bess did not perform where black spectators were barred at the gate. Some promoters met her price. The ones who would not lost her, money and all. Every age has people who say principles are luxuries the struggling cannot afford. She was as broke as ambition gets, and she never once found them too expensive. One more color from that Texas summer, and then the story turns toward Florida. Air shows of the day loved a parachute jump, and she staged them, hiring jumpers as the budget allowed. And more than once, the stories from that circuit say, when a hired jumper's nerve failed or a booking fell through, Bessie went up and made the jump herself, out of the machine and down the whole reach of the evening air under silk, because the crowd had been promised a jump, and a Coleman keeps the count. We hold the details of those stories loosely, as we hold all showman stories. What is documented is that parachute work was part of her repertoire at the end, and it will matter quietly at the edge of the story's last chapter that stepping out into the open sky was, for her, simply part of the trade. She liked to say, in those last years, a sentence that survives in several tellings, and since the versions differ a little, we will give it as the plain thing it was. The air, she said, is the only place free from prejudice. She had looked for an unfenced kingdom her whole life. She was now its most famous citizen. There was one piece of business left, the school, and so, In the winter of 1925 and 6, she went to Florida to finish raising it. Orlando, that winter, was orange country, small and green and warm, and Bessie Coleman spent in it some of the most settled months of her adult life. She stayed with the minister of the town, the Reverend Hezekiah Hill, and his wife Viola, good friends who became nearly family, in the parsonage of a missionary Baptist church, the same denomination as the little church of her childhood. The circle, you notice, quietly closing. The woman the papers called a daredevil taught Sunday scholars by the accounts of that winter, and sat on the porch in the evenings among the orange trees, and deepened in her faith, and was, her host remembered, happy. She was also, because she was Bessie Coleman, working 3 jobs at once. She opened a beauty shop in Orlando, hands back at the exact trade of the stroll, every manicure a brick for the school. She kept lecturing, church halls and school rooms, the film reels turning, the message unchanged, and she booked the flying season ahead. The school was no longer a dream in the far distance. She spoke of it now as a thing nearly in hand, months away, not years. And she wrote in those weeks, in letters the biographers preserve, that she was at last on the threshold of the thing she had worked toward for so long. Read her ambition plainly, because it was plain. Not fame, which she had, not records, which she had, but a door propped permanently open, with a sign over it that said in effect, "No ocean required. You who were refused, be refused no more." 2 pieces of business rounded out the winter. In Dallas there was an airplane, another old Jenny, bought for her use, and the last of its price was paid, the accounts of that spring say, with help from a young white admirer of hers named Edwin Beeman, heir to a chewing gum fortune, one of those odd, warm, sideways gifts this story keeps producing. The machine would be flown over from Texas when the season opened, and from Jacksonville, on Florida's Atlantic coast, came an invitation. The Negro Welfare League there was staging a grand May Day celebration, the 1st of May, 1926, and it wanted the most famous black woman in America to fly at it, and a parachute jump was promised on the bills. She accepted. It was exactly the kind of engagement she had made her own, a black community's own festival, its children watching, the gate money flowing toward the school. At the end of April, she went to Jacksonville, was welcomed with honors, dined among friends and admirers, and spoke, as always, about the school, months away now, almost touchable. The plane came over from Dallas with a young mechanic and publicity man, a Texan named William Wills, at the controls. It was an old, hard-used machine, the kind she had flown her whole American career, because they were the machines her country's arithmetic allowed her. On the last evening of April, she was, by every account that survives, in high spirits, at the very top of her fame, with the school fund the fullest it had ever been, and the next day's sky sold out below her. And now, the moment we promised, at the very start of tonight, to pass gently, and we will keep the promise exactly. On the morning of the 30th of April, 1926, Bessie Coleman went up over Jacksonville with William Wills in the old Jenny, a practice flight, to survey the field where the next day she would fly and jump. High over the city, the machine failed. Those who examined the wreck afterward said a loose tool, a wrench, had slid into the controls and jammed them. The plane could not be righted. Bessie Coleman and William Wills were both killed. She was 34 years old. That is the whole of it. We will not fly that flight with her, and no one who loved her would want us to. She had told the world, from a hospital bed, that as soon as she could walk, she would fly. She walked and she flew to the last morning of her life, in machines her country would not better, and toward a school her country would not build. And if you are looking for the meaning in it, it is not in the falling, it is in every single day of the 34 years before, and in everything that now follows. Because what happened next is the harbor this whole story has been sailing for, and it is why her name is spoken in this room tonight. 100 years on, softly, over a fire, they mourned her like a head of state. In Jacksonville, the community that had invited her filled a church for her. In Orlando, where her coffin paused on the journey home, the Hills Church overflowed, and the streets outside held the ones who could not enter. And then Chicago. Her city took her back, the way queens are taken home. Thousands upon thousands filed past her casket, and at the great funeral service, the crowd stood packed outside for blocks, and presiding over it all stood a woman whose own name is thunder. In American history, Ida B. Wells, the journalist and crusader who knew exactly what had been lost and said so. They buried her in Lincoln Cemetery, just south of the city she'd made her own. She left no fortune. It had all gone into the fund, the lectures, the machines, the rules she would not break. She left something with better wings. Because now, watch what the morning kept. 3 years after her death, in 1929, in Los Angeles, a black veteran and engineer named William Powell founded a flying club for black aviators and named it the Bessie Coleman Aero Club, the seat of exactly the school she had been months from opening. And the club spread, city by city, carrying her name on their doors. In 1931, Powell's Flyers staged the first all-black air show in America, and some 15,000 people came out to watch black pilots fill a California sky. 5 years after a Texas washerwoman's daughter had been the only one, that same era, in Chicago, the black pilots of her own city, the men and women building the flying schools of the South Side, began, in that same year of 1931, a tradition that ought to be told in every classroom in America. They flew out over Lincoln Cemetery in formation and dropped flowers from their open cockpits down onto Bessie Coleman's grave, and they kept doing it year after year for decades, petals falling out of the unfenced kingdom onto the woman who had opened it. Powell wrote a book in those years, Black Wings, and dedicated it to her, and set down in it the sentence that is her truest monument. Because of Bessie Coleman, he wrote, "We have overcome that which was worse than racial barriers. We have overcome the barriers within ourselves and dared to dream." And the dream compounded, the way banked things do. The Chicago flying schools. Her memory helped train the generation of black pilots and instructors who stood ready when the Second World War finally forced open the military door. The Flyers' history remembers as the Tuskegee Airman. Her thread runs, hand to hand, straight into that fabric. The century rolled on and kept counting. Her city named the road that runs by O'Hare, one of the busiest airports on Earth, Bessie Coleman Drive, so that every day, in their thousands, airliners full of passengers of every color taxi past her name on their way into the sky. She was refused. Her face went onto a United States postage stamp in 1995, and in our own decade, onto the quarter, the smallest scale of all, now weighing in her favor. The count keeper counted at last. And in September of 1992, an American physician named Mae Jemison lay on her back in the shuttle Endeavor on the launch pad in Florida, down the very same Atlantic coast from Jacksonville, counting down to become the first black woman in space. Astronauts may carry a few small personal things. Among hers, she carried a photograph of Bessie Coleman. It rode to orbit, that photograph, and went around and around the whole blue earth, over Texas, over Chicago, over the Somme, over every cotton field and every gate, at a height where the idea of a fence is not even visible. And if you want to know how far a person can travel from a one-room schoolhouse 4 miles up a dirt road, the answer is now on record, and the answer is, there is no fence, there is no ceiling, there was never anything up there but sky. So, let the story settle now, the way a field settles when the show is over and the crowds have gone home to supper, the way an airfield settles at night, wing by wing, into the warm dark. A pine woods town in the corner of Texas, and a midwinter baby, 10th of 13. A quarter acre and a house built by hand. Cotton rows to the horizon, and a girl at the weighing scale doing arithmetic against the world and winning. 4 miles of dirt road to a one-room school, walked twice a day, gladly. A library wagon 2 or 3 times a year, and a girl reading her family the story of Harriet Tubman by lamplight, taking quiet notes. A brass band at a train station for 1 term of college. 5 years of wash tubs and not 1 inch of surrender. A train north to the brightest street in black America. Small, precise hands in a barbershop parliament, filing, listening. A brother's teasing about the women of France, and a laugh that stopped in the middle, and a decision. Every flight school in America saying the same no. A newspaper man who said go where the air is honest. French verbs at night in the loop. A winter ocean crossed alone. A field by the sea in France. 9 miles, walked twice a day, gladly, again. A wooden biplane, learning to obey her. A small card in French, dated the 15th of June, 1921, heavier than every fence in Texas. A silver cup from a Broadway stage, figure 8s over Long Island for the Hellfighters, and over Chicago for her mother. Queen Bess in the headlines, and film reels in church halls, and $5 rides that took whole congregations off the earth for the first time in their bloodlines. A movie set walked off, with the best exit line of the decade. A hospital bed telegram, promising the sky, and the promise kept. Juneteenth over Houston, 60 years after the reading. 1 gate at Waxahachie, everyone through together. A rule never broken and never regretted. An orange grove in Orlando, a beauty shop, a porch at evening. Letters home saying, the threshold at last. And then the morning we did not watch, and after it, a name on flying clubs from coast to coast. 15,000 faces at the first all-black air show. Flowers falling from open cockpits onto a Chicago grave, year after year, for decades. A road by the great airport, a stamp, a quarter, and a photograph of her, riding in an astronaut's keeping, around and around and around the whole unfenced earth. She asked her country for a classroom and it said no, so she took the sky instead, and then she held the door so the rest could follow, and they followed, and they are following still. Somewhere over your head, this very night, in the dark you are lying in, someone is flying who traces a permission all the way back to her. The kingdom she claimed has no gates at all now, at any hour, in any weather. That is the count. Check twice, and it comes out hers. Your own day is done too. Whatever it held, it is held now. You do not have to carry it another step tonight. The wind out on the field is low and easy. The crickets are keeping the hours, and above your roof, going quietly about its enormous business, is the country she chose. No fences from horizon to horizon. First stars out, room in it for absolutely everyone. And tonight, for this hour before sleep, you have had a seat in it. The ride is smooth, and the landing, you already know, is safe. Sleep now. Good night. History will keep till morning.